Hello and welcome to another episode of the Smarter Tech Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Marco Ruggiero, and this is, I don't know, maybe the fifth time we have a conversation. You were on my
Probably.
summits, you were on my podcast, and please, for people that maybe are not familiar with your work, just introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your scientific background, and then we're going to dive into a brand new topic for me about detoxification of micro and nanoplastics. We're going to get into the problem soon here.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. It is a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege to be with you and to be interviewed by you. And as you say, that this is probably the fifth or the sixth time that we have this conversation, and every time is all the more pleasant. First of all, I wish to apologize with your audience for my thick accent, but this reflects the fact that I was born 68 years ago in the beautiful city of Florence, or Firenze, as we should say in Tuscany, in Italy. I studied there. I got my MD in 1980. Later on, I got a specialization in diagnostic radiology and also a PhD in molecular biology. I spent a lot of time in the US working as a postdoc at Burroughs Wellcome, famous or infamous big pharma, as you prefer, in North Carolina. And over there, I had the opportunity to write a scientific article with a Nobel laureate, Sir John Vane. Later, I moved to the NIH, National Institute of Health of the US government in Bethesda, Maryland, working on oncogenes, the genes that are responsible for cancer, with the top scientists such as Professor Stu Aronson. In those days, I also had the opportunity to meet Professor Peter Duesberg, who was visiting from Berkeley. He is famous, or also in his case, we could say infamous, for his theories about AIDS and HIV. And I also had the opportunity to write a scientific article with him. After some years at the NIH in Bethesda, I moved back to Italy when I got tenure of molecular biology at the University of Firenze, where I worked until 2014, if I remember correctly, 10 years ago. And after I retired, I moved to Arizona, where I'm currently located. This is my office in Arizona, USA, of course. And at about the same time, so more than 10 years ago, I founded a company in Switzerland that is called Silver Spring, in memory of my staying in Maryland. In Silver Spring, my daughter was born a few years ago. And this company is dedicated to what today we call microbiome research. That is to exploit or to harness the power of the human microbiome to prevent a number of conditions. Of course, we cannot talk about curing anything, but at least we can try to stay healthy against all the dangers and damages that are daily inflicted upon us by toxicants of all types, electromagnetic fields of all types, man-made electromagnetic fields, those are particularly dangerous, or as today's topic is micro and nanoplastics, which fall within the category of toxicants. I prefer to use the word toxicants rather than toxins because in science, toxins are those produced by bacteria, like the tetanus toxin. Toxicants is a more general term, so you can have heavy metals, glyphosate or nanoplastic categorized under toxicants. That's why I prefer to use the term toxicants. I try to be as easy as possible because we want to divulge things, but at the same time, I try to be as precise as possible. I don't want to be criticized by colleagues of mine because I'm using inappropriate terms. So toxicants is what we usually refer to as toxins, but is a little bit more precise. Now, harnessing the power of the microbiome was instrumental for a number of things, for empowering our immune system that is largely dependent on the function of our microbiome, gut microbiome in premise, but also the skin microbiome and microbiome all over our bodies and inside our bodies, including our brains. So that's briefly my, being old and having worked in research for 40-some years, could take hours to describe everything, but I think it will be deadly boring. Let's say that I've published more than 200 scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals. You can go to Google Scholar and Google my name, and you can find most of them are in the public domain. I have patents issued by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I am routinely invited to a number of conferences and congresses. Most of the times I decline the offer because I like to spend my time working in research and development rather than to be on a podium. This type of ego is long gone. But I like to do events like this one because in particular with people so well knowledgeable, so well educated as Nick, it is a pleasure to have a conversation. So I truly like this type of events. I could go on for hours, but I promise I will not do it. I stop it here.
Sure. Well, it's an honor. I know you're very busy. You're always developing new products and, publishing scientific studies. So it's a real honor to be able to have your time and attention and expertise on this podcast today. And the reason we connected again was really you sent me this email telling me about the problems with micro and nanoplastics. And I had to stop for a moment and read the email a few times. And I said, my God, I did hear in the news here and there that obviously bottled water, or microplastics and microplastics in tap water, for example. But then the scientific studies that you referred to talked about the distinction between microplastics and nanoplastics and the fact that the evidence is now mounting that they are, let's say, that they correspond to ill health, which is, I guess, something we could have expected to eventually come out in the science, but it's good that it's coming out because maybe it's going to lead to, policy changes. At the same time, it's a very scary thought. So I don't know where you want to start, maybe just establishing the problem. Where are we at with microplastics and what is this, let's say, new thread of science that we have around nanoplastics?
Well, first of all, a little bit of definition. Micro and nano refers to the size. Mm-hmm. As you know, if we use the meter system and not the imperial units, you have 1 meter, 1 millimeter, which is 1,000th of a meter, 1 micrometer, that is 1,000th of a millimeter. So very, very tiny. Let's say our cells, our red blood cells are 7 micron. So just to give you an idea. And then you have a nanometer. Nanometer is 1,000th of a micrometer. So 1 millionth of a millimeter or 1 billion of a meter. So very, very, very tiny. Now, with a microscope, you can see micrometers. As a matter of fact, with a common microscope, you can see red blood cells. And red blood cells are 7 micrometers. So you can easily see the micrometers. Now, using microscopes, even advanced microscopes, people were able to detect the presence of microplastics, that is little spheres of plastic in the size of the micrometers. And this was relatively easy to do because just have a professional microscope, analyze, let's say, bottled water, and you find microplastics. Where do they come from? Most people think they come from the bottle because the bottle is made of plastic, which is only partially true. Most of it comes from the filters because, of course, that water, even if it comes from a pristine source in the most pristine and clean mountain, whether in Colorado or in Switzerland or in Canada, why not? Nevertheless, it has to be filtered. Otherwise, you run the risk of having giardia or other parasites. By the way, would not be classified as drinkable. And those filters are made of plastic. And by the same shear forces that push the water through the filter to remove whatever parasite or other things you don't want to be there, that force also removes tiny pieces of plastic from the filter. Many, many years ago, I was working in the field of kidney dialysis, that unfortunate situation when people's kidneys do not work. And so the purification of the blood has to be done with a machine, a dialysis machine. And those dialysis machines, they had filters that, of course, cleaned the blood that then it is reintroduced into the patient. And our work was to assess the biocompatibility of those plastic filters with the cells of the human blood. And, they were biocompatible, but to a certain extent. None of them was completely inert. And so, of course, physicians, they choose the best that is available, and the industry is always looking for new materials that are always more biocompatible. But there is always an interaction between the cells of our blood and those plastics. So I accumulated some knowledge about these things when I was working in the field of kidney dialysis. We published several articles, all quite technical and boring, but you can retrieve them from the web if you like. So when the problem of the microplastic became so well known and widespread, I went back to this knowledge of mine. And all right, so we know that there is a pollution of microplastics. This has been known. They come from the filters. They also come from the degradation of the water bottles or bottles of Coca-Cola, for what is worth. As long as they're made of plastic, if you leave them in the sun, we know that ultraviolet rays, they degrade the plastic, and so you have pieces of plastic into your Coke or into your water. And all these had been known, so nothing new in what I'm saying. What is new is that about 1 year ago, some scientists decided to go one step further and use not conventional microscopy, but a much more advanced type of microscopy. Think about electron microscopy. Actually, it wasn't electron microscopy, but we don't want to be too technical here. So by using, let's say, much more potent microscopes, they were able to identify pieces of plastic that were of the size of nanometers. That is 1,000th smaller than the little spheres of plastic that had been known as microplastic. And the amount was incredible, was astonishing, was 100,000 times more than the known amount of microplastics. Now, microplastics are regulated because, of course, nobody wants too much plastic in your drinking water or in your drinking sodas or anywhere else. Nanoplastics are not regulated because nobody knows. Nobody knew about nanoplastics up until 1 year ago. And what is the difference? Why are nanoplastics dangerous? The reason is simple. Think of microplastics as spheres, like a football ball. And think about cells, human cells or animal cells for what is worth, like something much bigger than those spheres, much bigger than those balls. So cells are able to deal with microplastics because microplastics are big, but cells are bigger. And so they can deal. They can phagocytize, that is, they can eat them and destroy them, or they can bind them and eliminate with feces or urine. So this is the reason why, even though it was well known that microplastics were an ubiquitous contaminant, nevertheless, not much of a deal. Simply, you don't like to eat plastic, you don't like to drink plastic, but in the end, let's not say that they were inert, but not too dangerous, not like having other toxicants like heavy metals or glyphosate, not so bad. The story is completely different with nanoplastics because they are much, much, much smaller than cells, and therefore they penetrate into cells. They penetrate into the nucleus of the cell. They change the DNA. They cross the blood-brain barrier. They cross the placenta. There are articles you can retrieve in PubMed, so we're not talking about some fringe conspiracy blog. We're talking about the most serious source of scientific information, and they call it plasticenta instead of placenta. So heavily rich of plastics is the placenta, and not of people who live in some area of the world where there is a terrible contamination. No, of normal, common women. common, meaning living in the most normal parts of the world, whether it is in Western Europe or in North America or wherever they do this analysis, they find the placenta so rich in plastics, they call it plasticenta. And you can, this is a neologism, that ugly name, by the way, but this is to give you the idea that before you are born, when you're still in uterus, you are exposed to enormous amount of plastics that cross all the known barriers. They cross the blood-brain barrier, they accumulate not only in the brain, which already is bad, but inside the cells of the brain, inside the neurons. They disrupt the neurotransmission. They disrupt the endocrine function. And the human body has no defense against those because they are too small. Where do they come from? Same source. But up until now, it wasn't known that the microplastics can be broken down chemically by reactions that occur spontaneously into nanoplastics. This had not been known because nobody had the technical tools to observe and measure the nanoplastics. Now, there is no safe house here because you find them in the Arctic, you find them in the depths of the oceans, you find them absolutely everywhere, in the tissue of every animal, of every living beings, plants, everywhere. Nanoplastics are ubiquitous. The more they look, the more they find them. Now, this is a scary part of the conversation, but be assured that then there is a solution. And the solution comes from somebody that is as small as the nanoplastics. And you guess who they are, the microbes. But just one moment. So there is no safe house. You can't go and live in the most pristine, in the most beautiful and uncontaminated area of the world, because even there are nanoplastics. Also, there is no part of our body that is immune from these nanoplastics, and the immune system also is negatively affected, because of course they are an extraneous something, and the immune system tries to do something, but it's not equipped to deal with these things so little. That's bad enough. But even worse, if you consider that the nanoplastics, they interact with the known toxicants. They interact with glyphosate. They interact with heavy metals. So the interaction of two things, none of which is good, isn't a good thing. So being this the situation, how can we do? Can we do like the old Vikings did? The Vikings in Denmark or in Scandinavia, they couldn't drink the water because the water was heavily contaminated. That's why they were drinking only beer. I learned this when I was in Copenhagen. So they only drank beer because being fermented, of course, the microbes of the fermentation of beer had eliminated all the pathogenic microbes. Can we do this? Can we move from water to beer? We can, but we will not solve the problem of microplastics because beer is made with water in the end, and the water is contaminated. And the same holds true for tea, green tea, or whatever other things. And then we focus on drinkable things, but the same applies to food. Okay, so period. It is like with the EM fields. You can't live without them. They are everywhere. EM fields and nanoplastics. There is no way you can shield. There is no way you can isolate from those. So they are here, and they're here to stay. They stay in the environment longer than anything else, maybe as long as radioactive compounds. They do not decay because the nanoplastics, they are the product of decay. They are the products of the decay of the microplastics. Now, the microbes here come to the rescue. Why? Because the microbes of our microbiome have the ability to do several things. They bind the nanoplastics and you eliminate them from your gut every time you go to the toilet. Also, they degrade the nanoplastics. The nanoplastics cannot be broken down, but can be neutralized. So they bind to substances that neutralize and eliminate them. Also, the microbes, they do something else. They counteract the nefarious effects of microplastics. For example, exposure to micro and nanoplastics is associated with increased reactive oxygen species, oxidation, oxidative stress. And the microbes, they do produce substances that counteract oxidative stress. Also, the nanoplastics are associated with inflammation, systemic inflammation, and the microbes, they do produce molecules that counteract systemic inflammation. But then there is something interesting. In our products, not only we have an incredible biodiversity, I think we already covered this point in the past. Our products, they don't have 5 or 6 different strains of microbes, they have 400 different strains of microbes. So they cover everything that is known about the human microbiome. It's a complete and complex ecosystem where the microbes cooperate with each other in a very balanced way, exactly as it should be in our healthy microbiome. Now, you may wonder, okay, I understand microbes bind micro and nanoplastics. Microbes degrade and neutralize micro and nanoplastics. Microbes have anti-inflammatory properties, antioxidative stress properties, fine, all these things have been known. But what about the nanoplastics that are inside our cells? Well, our products that go under the commercial name of Bravo, they're unique for a number of reasons. But one reason why they are unique, it is because being an entire microbiome, an entire ecosystem, you don't have only the beneficial healthy microbes like the bifidobacterium, lactobacillus, lactococcus, everybody knows about this, and we have them, of course, plenty of them. But we also have something that something that has a strange story, because it had been known more than 100 years ago as the potential therapy for everything, for every disease, for the major diseases. Then it went completely forgotten. Why? Because drugs, antibiotics, were synthesized, and there is much more money to be made with drugs rather than with bacteriophages. Bacteriophages are viruses, friendly viruses, nothing to be confused with, COVID, HIV, or other unfriendly viruses, assuming they do exist. Now, friendly viruses that are kind of the microbiome of the microbes. We are humans, and we have the microbes inside our microbiome, inside our gut, for example. But the microbes themselves, they have their own little microbes inside themselves, and they're called phages. And the phages are as useful to the microbes as the microbes, the bifidobacterium, are useful to us. Now, the phages are very small viruses that travel from one microbe to the other. They transfer information. They help fighting off pathogenic microbes. That's why they were heralded more than 100 years ago as the cure for infectious diseases and also for cancer. Now, phages are able, being viruses, it is their job to penetrate into cells. And guess what the phages do? They penetrate into cells, and whether they like it or not, they bind the nanoplastics there. And then the phages, what do? What viruses do? Once they have entered the cells, then they go out because they wanted to enter into another cell. But going out, they remove the nanoplastics from the cells. And at the end of the cycle, they're taken up by the bacteria and eliminated. So our product, having the phages, and all these, by the way, everything I'm saying has been scientifically demonstrated. You can find articles, and if the audience wants to have all the bibliographic references, I can provide them. So we demonstrated the presence of phages in our Bravo products, and these phages, they do contribute to the elimination of the nanoplastics that are inside our cells. So here we have a multi-pronged effect against nanoplastics. On one side, the known anti-inflammatory, antioxidative stress of the microbes of our probiotic Bravo products, microbiome products. But also we have the neutralization or degradation, if you prefer, of the nanoplastics by the enzymes released by the bacteria. And also, and unique in the world, we have the phages that enter into the cells and remove the nanoplastics that have accumulated inside the cells. So those products of ours are so unique and so fantastic, not because we invented, actually we did not invent anything, nature invented all these. Our only merit, if we have one, has been to simply listen to nature and ask nature, so what is nature doing against this? What nature can do? We could not invent any drug. We could not invent any chemical molecule. Let the microbes do this, because the microbes were here before we were here. Life on Earth began as microbes, the so-called first cell appeared 3.5 billion years ago. And so actually we did not invent anything. We simply rediscovered something that had always been there. And so our Bravo product has an entire microbiome that includes phages, that has more than 400 different strains, is the only possible solution to this ubiquitous pollution of micro and nanoplastics. You see, I am drinking water here, and this water comes from a plastic bottle. I'm not worried, not at all. First of all, I couldn't do otherwise. Even if the water came from a glass bottle or an aluminum bottle, in any case, it had been filtered. So it had micro nanoplastics in any case. And so why should I spend my money? I mean, I try to buy the best available source water. I don't buy filtered water, but it doesn't make much difference. But since I take Bravo every day now for the past 10 years or so, since when we began working on this field, I'm not worried at all, just like I'm not worried about electromagnetic fields for, another reason. We have discussed this in the past, but again, the principle is always the same. With Presidium, that is the name of the product developed to mitigate or eliminate the harmful effects of a man-made electromagnetic field, or with Bravo, the principle is the same. That is, let the microbes do their work. Different microbes, because the microbes in Presidium are microbes that are resistant to radiations. The microbes in Bravo, they do a number of things. Among those, eliminate toxicants. And we have published this. We have strong evidence. For example, you eliminate heavy metals, you eliminate the glyphosate, and now we know that we also eliminate macro and nanoplastics. So the principle of my research is always the same. Let's harness the power of the microbiome. There is nothing stronger, nothing more versatile, nothing more adaptable than the microbiome, than the microbes. So let's have them work for us. And then we can enter into philosophy and discuss whether it is them working for us or it is us working for them, considering that, my body and your body as well, if we count the number of our human cells, we end up with a number. If we count the number of our microbial cells, we end up with a number that is 10 times higher. So we're only 10% human. But the story goes, it's even stranger. It's even weirder. If we count the number of human genes you and I have, 22,000, not too many, 22,000 genes. It's all it takes to make a human. Can we count the number of microbial genes inside us? We can try. We end up with a number that is as big as the number of atoms in the entire observable universe. It is called the Eddington number. It is 10 to the 80. So you have 10 followed by 80 zeros. That's the Eddington number. And the number of microbial genes is of the same order of magnitude. So We have to discuss, are we working for them? Are they working for us? Well, as long as there is a harmonious equilibrium, that's fine. So I will leave this a question to philosophers. I'm no philosopher, not at all. Point is that I like to think that the microbes are working for me, and I do my best to stay in good health and give them this container that is my body for as long as possible.
Hey, I need to interrupt this podcast for just a second. I want to tell you about one of the EMF protection or health supporting products I really believe in and which help finance the costs associated with this show. One of the very best ways to know for sure what kind of EMF radiation levels you're being exposed to at home or at work is to hire what's called an EMF mitigation specialist. And some of the very best specialists in this type of work in North America are Brian Hoyer and his team from Shielded Healing. And here's what Shielded Healing can do for you. They can come to your home, they take EMF readings using professional level equipment, that is, and they identify the worst sources of EMFs that you can turn off and help you create a safer, calmer, and health supporting bedroom and entire home. Brian has personally mitigated the homes and offices of the very best functional medicine doctors in the world, like Dr. Ben Lynch, Dr. Joseph Mercola, and many others, and he's always at the cutting edge of the latest mitigation strategies, including how to shield against 5G. To learn more about Shielded Healing and if Brian's team might be doing consultations in your area soon, mainly in the US, just go to theemfguy.com/shielded healing and you can use the coupon code SMARTER at checkout to get 10% off a consultation or shielding materials. That's SMARTER at checkout for 10% off. And remember, creating a cleaner EMF environment at home is an investment you're making towards your long-term wellness and happiness. Okay, back to the podcast. Yeah, this is brilliant. And one question comes to mind about the detoxification of nano or microplastics from cells. How is there a certain scientific method that has been developed to look at the excretion of nano or microplastics? And how can we know in scientific research that we are excreting more of them when you have certain strains of bacteria inside you? So how did you quantify this sort of, let's say, detoxification or removal effect, if it's possible to do so?
It is possible. The field, it is just at its beginning because please remember that up until 1 year ago, nobody knew about nanoplastics. What is known, and again, I can provide you with the scientific literature, are two things. One is that bacteriophages or phages, they're able to enter human cells. This wasn't known until recently. Now we know that this is something those viruses do. Nobody knows whether they do this by mistake because actually they should enter into microbial cells, bacterial cells. Or if they do this on purpose, nobody has asked any virus. But we know that viruses, bacteriophages, phages, they do enter my human cells. This is a known. Another known fact is that phages, they bind microplastics and nanoplastics as well. And this is another known fact. A third known fact is that the entering of phages into human cells is transient. They don't stay there. So this means that they go away. So there is evidence that they enter. There is evidence that they don't stay there. So we can safely assume that they enter and then they go out. And considering that they have been demonstrated to bind the nanoplastics, it is also safe to assume that they remove nanoplastics from the inside of the cells. How much? Nobody knows. Nobody knows for a very simple reason. Nobody knows how many nanoplastics are inside every single human cell. But the fact that at least there are 3 knowns, phages enter into human cells, phages do not remain in human cells, so this means that they exit, and phages bind nanoplastics. This leads to the observation that those who have a healthy microbiome they have much less of the toxic effects of macro nanoplastics, so much less inflammation, much less disruption of the endocrine system, of the neurotransmission, and so on and so on and so on. Have we done experiments with our products as far as nanoplastics are concerned? The answer is a partial yes. We are doing those experiments. Do I have results that I am scientifically confident to divulge right now? The answer is no, because up until I have rock solid evidence, like I have, for example, for the electromagnetic fields protection, I prefer not to pronounce myself, because I wait, even though I'm retired, I'm still a scientist. I still have this mindset. I don't want to say something not until I am 100% confident, because I have repeated the experiments. The first observations are encouraging. This is what I can say. And if we have this conversation, let's say 1 year from now, most likely I can give you some definite answer. But the theory is there. The feasibility is there. And so since I'm taking this product in any case for all the other innumerable benefits it has, I like to think that it also helps me counteracting the harmful effects of micro and nanoplastics.
For sure. And as you mentioned, it's probably not just micro and nanoplastics. Just the number of new chemicals that are introduced in the environment every year is staggering. So I think that if we discover that one of the, I think, overlooked ways that we detoxify is through our microbial situation or microbiome throughout the body, in and out of the body, I must say, then I think it's very smart to just support your microbiome. But can you let us know a little bit more about the development of Bravo, in a sense that I know that it is based on nature. It is based on creating a fermented drink. There's the Bravo you can do as a yogurt form, and there's also the Bravo that you sent me that was a capsule form made out of or fermented out of hemp. So just get into what the product actually is. And I think it just has a very different philosophy, as you explained, compared to probiotics maker that will say, okay, well, there are 25 different strains of probiotics that are en vogue right now, that are popular in scientific research. We're going to cram these into a pill and then launch to market, right? That's a very different mentality than saying, what is the system that automatically is created in nature, and trying to include that in a product. So just maybe go into the philosophy a little bit more deeper, and then how the products are actually taken, because there are different options there for people.
Sure. Well, the story began 12, 13 years ago. I was still working in pure and applied research. And actually, we were pursuing an immunogenic factor that I had been studying since the early 90s when I was working at the NIH, the National Cancer Institute. And in those days, it was called macrophage stimulating factor. Then a Japanese scientist coined a new name and called the macrophage activating factor. Now, macrophages are cells of our immune system that are extremely important in the fight against infections, in the fight against cancer. Essentially, they are some of the most important cells of our immune system. This macrophage activating factor, that is abbreviated in GCMAF, is present in our blood. And when its levels are lower, for a number of reasons, mainly because there is an enzyme called nagalase that destroys it, then our immune system is not working properly, and we are prone to infectious diseases, cancer, autoimmune diseases. So the idea is simple. It's like insulin for diabetic. You have low insulin, okay, we give you insulin from the outside. Problem is that up until our discovery or our development, GCMF was purified from blood. And to introduce a blood product is complex, it's risky, number of regulatory issues, of course. So the idea was, how can we produce a GCMAF not from blood? Where could it come from? And then we began researching about the development of our human immune system. Let's say we are born through the vaginal canal. So let's forget about C-sections for a moment. When we are inside the uterus, the womb of our mothers, let's say that we are sterile. Probably we are not, but for the sake of clarity, let's say we are sterile. By going through the vaginal canal, we acquire our mother's microbiome. And then, because we are mammals, we begin having our first food, which is not milk. In the first 3 days of human lactation, the human mammary gland, but also of all other mammals, doesn't produce milk, produces colostrum. And colostrum is not as nutritious as milk, but it is extremely rich of immunogenic factors. You know, the goal of evolution, the goal of nature is not to feed you, but to make you survive first, and then we can feed you. You can stay without too much nutrition food for 2 or 3 days, but it is more important that you become, you can fight off all the pathogens, all the bad bacteria. Now, colostrum in and by itself is very rich of immunogenic factors. Immunogenic means factors, proteins mostly, and peptides that stimulate the development and the function of the immune system. But what happens? This colostrum is ingested, it goes into the gut of the newborn, and in the gut of the newborn, it finds all the microbes that the newborn had previously acquired by going through the vaginal canal during birth. And these microbes, what do? They metabolize in a process of fermentation the colostrum, and they make GCMF out of colostrum. And this has been demonstrated, this has been published 10 years ago, and so on and so on. Okay, so we say, here is the solution. Let's have colostrum, let's have the same microbes that are known to be in the gut of the newborn human baby. Let's incubate all these. Let's make a sort of a yogurt, or more similar to a kefir rather than a yogurt, but it's the same. And we have it. And that's what we did. At that point, little was known about the complexity of the human microbiome. So we simply thought, okay, we are reproducing the healthy gut human microbiome that we have in the first days of our life, and we feed this microbiome with colostrum and also a little bit of milk, because there is also always a ratio of colostrum and milk. It's never pure colostrum, never pure milk. And so we made all the calculations, we made hundreds of experiments, and we ended up with a formula that is still currently in use because it's perfect as it is. Not because we are perfect, because nature is perfect, at least for us humans. So essentially, what we did was to reproduce, first in a petri dish, then in a yogurt maker, what happens in our guts when we first have the first colostrum from our mothers that is fermented by the microbes. So the Bravo products, which, there is a story under the name Bravo. And the story comes from my days in the army, where we have the so-called phonetic alphabets. When you say A as in Andrew, maybe somebody in France doesn't know. So there is a convention, A as in Alpha, B as in Bravo, C as in Charlie, D as in Delta. And so we say, what's the name? What name can we give to this product? Bravo, because in all languages, Bravo is pronounced the same. Bravo means something good, and so Bravo came out. And it's not, nobody can have a patent or a trademark on Bravo, because Bravo is not, you cannot trademark Bravo. So we patented the product, but of course, a trademark, everybody can call Bravo whatever product they want, and that's an advantage. So we had this Bravo, and then, only then, and we were happy because we were making a lot of GCMF Later on, a few years later, an independent laboratory in Belgium measured the GCMF activity in Bravo against this nefarious enzyme called nagalase, and they found that it has 100 times more GCMF activity than the injectable GCMF that was used as a reference, as a benchmark, 100 times more. And also this has been published. So a lot of GCMF. A lot of GCMF that, by the way, it works naturally. You don't have to inject, you don't want to inject the yogurt, of course, but it works on the macrophages in your oral mucosa, in the Waldeyer ring here, and in your gut. So it works in the most natural way, just like when we were born. It is as if we renew, it is not as if, it is a renewal of the healthy microbiome on a daily basis. Think of a computer. With the passing of time, you corrupt the codes, you corrupt the system. So at a certain point, you have to erase everything and reload the original programs. The same happens with our microbiome. At the beginning, it was uncorrupted, but then we take antibiotics, we drink chlorinated water, we're exposed to electromagnetic fields, all type of things, and it becomes corrupted. That is, some microbes, they grow more than they should. Other microbes, you have less than they should. With Bravo, you simply reconstitute the uncorrupted microbiome that we had in the very first days of our lives on a daily basis. And this, in my opinion, is a good thing. Only then we discovered a number of other things, that the microbiome was much richer than we expected. Up to a certain point, we were saying that it contained 40 microbial strains, which is always more and better than the 5 or 6 that you find that, as you say, people stuff in their capsules. Mm-hmm. But then we went to analyze in detail the DNA, and we ended up with a number 10 times higher, 400 strains. And we discovered the phages. We didn't know that the phages were there. We discovered them. And again, all this has been published. Because Bravo is not a few microbes stuffed in a capsule. It is an entire universe. It is an entire microbiome, an entire ecosystem that has the microbes and the molecules they produce. That today they are called postbiotics. So we have the prebiotics, that is colostrum, that is like the food for the microbes. So we have the microbes, the probiotics, and we have the postbiotics that are the product of metabolism of the microbes, including the GCMF. At the beginning, we were focused only on GCMF, but then we discovered, for example, you take milk, a bovine milk, and you measure the number of immunogenic proteins that are there, and you end up with 5 to 10 proteins like lactalbumin or transferrin, known for their pro-immunogenic properties. Then you ferment this milk with the microbes of Bravo. And now you count again the number of proteins and peptides, you end up with 236. And all this has been published. That weren't there because those are the products of metabolism or fermentation. That is, the microbes, they take the proteins of the milk and they transform them into a number, into 236 newly formed peptides that have a number of immunogenic anti-inflammatory effects, neurotropic effects. So this is the power of fermentation. Bravo is a fermented product. As you said, you can make Bravo at home in your yogurt maker, or we can make it for you in our Swiss facility, and then we lyophilize it, put it in a capsule, and you simply have to swallow a capsule. The principle is the same. One capsule is the equivalent of a cup of yogurt. Simply, the water has been removed, but all the rest stays there. And it is rehydrated once you ingest it, of course. Then, since we knew that dairies, colostrum, of course, is a dairy, and milk, many people may have intolerances or allergies. We say, okay, how can we do the same thing without dairies? What is a suitable medium where to grow the microbes and where the microbes have something that they can ferment? And we found that the ideal medium is hemp seed proteins, are hemp seeds because of the proteins that the hemp seeds have. You know, the proteins that are in the hemp seeds, oddly enough, are the same that are in milk, particularly albumin and another one that is called edestin. Edestin is like an antibody. So I don't know why hemp seeds, they have these proteins. I don't know, evolutionarily speaking, why hemp seeds, they are so close to human milk. I have no idea. We should ask an evolutionist. But the point is that we ferment, again in Switzerland, we ferment hemp seed proteins, hemp seeds with the microbes of Bravo, and we end up with a product that we lyophilize it again, and we can provide it as a capsule. So this is, in short, a little bit of history of Bravo. Number of publications. Bravo has been used in a complementary approach to a cancer and a number of other diseases with excellent results that have been published in major scientific journals. And here we don't want to make any claim, but just read those papers and you find that Bravo has proven useful in a number of conditions. I don't know if this gave you an idea, but for a person who is so prolix as I am, to try to summarize 10 years, not of research, but 10 years of enthusiasm in a few words, I tell you, it's close to an impossible task. But
I think you did it very well. And I think I understand that, microplastics and nanoplastics is a new modern problem, and Bravo might be able to help with this problem, but it's a small sliver of what it actually does. When you talked about to me, it was very, very fascinating and almost touching how you are studying certain principles of what happens naturally in nature, just the newborn getting through the vaginal canal and getting inoculated, and what happens inside the body to create the first microbiome, and how we are able to take this principle and then, instead of trying to mimic nature by, just picking up strains, it's like, to me, I had this image. It's like the difference in biodiversity of a single flower in an empty pot with water compared to the Amazonian forest. That's kind of how I pictured it. Okay, we're trying to, and that's something I heard from some of my colleagues that are more skeptical or critical of probiotics products. It's not to say that all of them are bogus. I think some of them have clinical uses and some of them are well researched, but I think we are in the very infancy of understanding the microbiome, and I always found it very odd when I was getting into it over now nearly 15 years ago at this point, when I started seeing these miracle claims around probiotics. Oh, we figured out the perfect probiotic, the single pill. And I said, wait a minute, there's a few bacteria in there, but they've already uncovered that we have hundreds of different strains in the gut. So how does that work, right? What are the interactions, and how can they really claim that it's a single pill to, provide so many benefits? So I was always very skeptical. And I think that some marketing claims sometimes are exaggerated in that field, and it's very hard to decipher what is true and what is a little bit more towards empty promise. But I think that you are a deep systems thinker, the way I see it. And when you see a complex system, to me, you respect it. And you take that and respect it in the sense that you consider, just like me, I have this bias towards nature does things in a way that is more sophisticated than what we can currently understand. And the moment we'll get deeper into the nano and then even smaller than that, we'll figure out that there are other, not phages. We're going to call that nanophages, and this, we're going to invent new names for new phenomenon. And then we'll realize, oh my God, all this time we were not aware that another molecule existed. And that's kind of I think our short-sightedness in today's society and even in scientific research is causing many, many problems, both when we overlook what toxicants might be in things that we create. And then later we realize that, oh, maybe leaded gasoline was not a good idea, right? And leaded paint and asbestos in our walls. Oh, yeah, right. We thought it was not dangerous. And maybe some thought that, but eventually we discover other problems. And then when we try to also have benefits from products, we do the same mistake also, right? By being too focused on one molecule or one thing. And the way that I think you guys have developed it is very elegant, and I think shows a deep respect for natural processes. And it's not to say, you know, that only natural is better than synthetic. It's not a war against these terms, but I think that a lot of people in my audience will resonate with that, because it shows that there's almost something, I don't know if that's the right word, but to me, there's almost something sacred to nature because of the evolution where we just arrived there with this product and you create Bravo, but you know, it's billions of years of nature figuring out what is the right composition. Right. So anyway, there's no question there. It was just a general comment. My mind is officially blown. So thank you.
No, thank you. And actually, you have been able to rephrase what I had been unable to say. But yes, we have the highest respect for nature. This comes from my mindset as a scientist. And I know that I cannot even think of emulating or even worse, improving in nature. What I can do is to try to learn from nature. And in this respect, let me add just a few words about our manufacturing plant. So I'm not advertising here. I'm not good at marketing, not at all. But just to be consistent with everything you said, have you ever heard about Demeter? Or Demeter certification? Most likely
I'm not familiar.
And so you can Google it. But Demeter certification is the strictest and oldest certification parameter in the world, much earlier than organic or biologic or things. It was in 1924, exactly 100 years ago, that farmers in Germany and Switzerland, they realized that the use of pesticides, the use of chemicals was good because it improved the yield of the harvest, the yield of the crops. But they immediately realized, just at the beginning of the chemical revolution in agriculture, that something wasn't good because the animals and the plants and everything, you know, they made more money, yes, but something wasn't good. So they asked a researcher of those days, a certain Rudolf Steiner, to come up with a solution, because on one side, they needed to fertilize the soil, they needed to produce more also because there was a food scarcity in those days. But they didn't want to alter the balance of the soil, of the animals, and eventually of the human health. And so this Rudolf Steiner came out with a series of papers. And it was the beginning of what today is called biodynamic agriculture, that it uses all tools that are available from nature rather than from chemical synthesis. From nature to improve the quality, to improve the health of the animals, eventually to improve the health of the humans who consume those products from agriculture or from farming, and to improve the health of the planet. So just look for Demeter certification. We are Demeter certified. Of course, we are FDA certified, but that's more modern. That's a more cleanliness and respect of standard operating procedure. Fine, but and of course we are certified by the Swiss authorities, by the FDA, because we export in the US. Actually, Bravo can be bought from the US. You don't have to come to Switzerland. You don't have to order it from Switzerland. We have a warehouse in the US, so it is shipped from the US. But what we are proud of is our Demeter certification, because just go to demeter.org and you can read. And I like their vision. That is our vision as well. That, of course, human health, of course, profit, of course, economic development, but most important, it is what they call an holistic development. I'm reading here because, that's something I always have goosebumps. that includes a fifth sphere. They have these concentric spheres of a cosmic and spiritual impacts. Now, a yogurt and a spiritual impact? Are you kidding? No, I am not. And next time we can have more than 1 hour conversation on this. But I even published a couple of scientific articles, very boring, very technical, about human consciousness, the consciousness of the universe, and the microbiome. All these things, they go together. It's not easy to grasp them at first, but if another time we can have an hour and we can discuss about this. So I like the idea that, of course, we want to sell our products. We thank you if you help us marketing and bring in knowledge about our products. And of course, we want to help people. But deeper than this, more than this, I think that our goal is to improve not only our finances, not only our own wellness, but the wellness of the entire ecosystem. Because the microbes of Bravo, you eat them, but eventually you go to the restroom. And so you disperse them in the soil. Eventually they go somewhere. And we like to think that thanks to the fact that we are annually, yearly, inspected, audited by those of the meter, and they guarantee that our products, they respect the highest standards known to man about the health of the products and the health of the animals that give us their colostrum, their milk, the health of the plants that give us their hemp seeds and so on. And all this is taken into account. So we like to think that what we are doing also contributes, even as a minimal part, to this holistic approach, to this fifth sphere of cosmic and spiritual impact. Do I sound too much new age, too much? I'm close to California, even though I'm in Arizona. Maybe yes, even though I've always been extremely skeptical and critical about this way of thinking. But if we go into detail, then there is a truth to this.
I agree 100%. And, I think that the people I respect most are those that can both be in the spiritual and also grounded in science and in reality. But I think it takes both. I just find myself in the middle always. Sometimes when I get a little bit too out there, I come back and, remind myself, okay, this is the reality we're living in, and that's fine. But I think that what you're bringing to this world is very, very interesting, as always. Not only the product, but your contribution to this conversation. I think it was a fascinating conversation. And of course, people want to hear where can you get Bravo. The link is there underneath the video. It's going to be in the show notes, bravo-northamerica.com. And you also have a very generous coupon code EMF Guy 25 for 25% off. So I think that's a great incentive to try it and see for yourself, see how you feel. I think it's a very interesting product. Just like you mentioned Presidium, I'll also mention that Presidium, I did mention it, I think, on my newsletter, but just for people that maybe are wondering, where is this product again? There's now a new distributor for Presidium. So it's going to be also in the show notes. There's a separate conversation that we did on Presidium and let's say the fact that this product is able to teach our microbiome to help us resist more profoundly to EMF radiation. So that's a whole nother topic, but I'm so glad that we had this separate conversation on Bravo. And it has been a profound one for me. I'm sure people will talk about it, share it, and for years to come, literally.
Thank you, Nick. It has been a pleasure, honor, and privilege. And I'm not using these words lightly. I know what do they mean in English as well as in my native language. Truly, it is a privilege to have this conversation with you. And if I may, let's have another conversation about spirituality and how, the microbes, could you think about this? The microbes, they could help with our consciousness, with our spirituality. So let's have another conversation another time about this. It will be, again, a honor and privilege to have it.
Well, I know you're a fan favorite in my community, so we'll definitely have a conversation. This time, I think I'll let my I'll let Carla and my team know. Okay, let's have at least 2 hours if we get into this topic, so that way we can just go out there if necessary. Thank you so
and we
much.
can have a 25% discount on enlightenment.
Sounds good. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Nick. Bye bye then.
Bye. In case this wasn't already obvious, the information provided in this podcast is not intended to replace medical advice. We always recommend that you review this information with a functional medicine practitioner or environmental medicine doctor who is up to date with the latest information on the dangers of EMFs and the best practices around electro-hypersensitivity, just to name these two things. And if you want to support my work, please consider sharing this episode with people you care about. You can also invest in my book, courses, or recommended products found at theemfguy.com. Thank you.